I must contact the authorities. What could they possibly have been thinking? I was assaulted by a woman who appeared to be about 35, donning a hat and sunglasses. Can you determine her age? That is the clearest description I can provide. I'm struggling to comprehend what happened. Allow me to begin at the start. Perhaps then it will become clearer. I'm hopeful that jotting everything down will help me make sense of it. The shock of an unprovoked attack in public is unlike anything I've ever encountered. I simply cannot understand it. Just hours earlier, everything in life was wonderful. I enjoyed a fantastic life, a lovely house, savings, and a husband who cherished me. However, my happiness upon leaving the office on Monday was due to a more personal matter. My husband was away on business, and I had arranged to meet my lover John at home. John is a recent addition to my life, and he has introduced me to new experiences in the bedroom. That's why I was walking to my car with a grin. As I neared my car, I felt someone touch my shoulder. I turned around, hoping it was John, but instead, I was greeted with a punch in the face from an irate woman. I hardly saw her face before I hit the ground and she began kicking me in the back, all without uttering a single word. After she left, I was afraid she might come back, so I called out for assistance. The ambulance arrived and took me to the hospital. I got there before the evening rush, lost consciousness for a while, and was promptly taken care of. Other than a cut lip and a few bruises, I was fine. The medical staff cautioned me about the possibility of delayed concussion symptoms and advised me to apply ice to the bruises before I went home. The police interviewed me, but with only a vague description of a slim, blonde woman in a hat and sunglasses, the chances of finding her were slim. I couldn't even confirm if her hair color was natural or provide a motive for the assault. I requested a police escort back to my vehicle, but they informed me it was against policy. I tried to smile, but my lip was in too much pain. My attempt to call John for a lift was unsuccessful, so I had to hail a cab. My revised plan for the evening included taking pain medication, possibly some vodka, icing my bruises, and soaking in a bath until it was time to call my husband. He always had a way of helping me understand things and could make me laugh when I felt down. I wouldn't be shocked if he left everything and drove 4 hours to get home after learning about the incident. I suppose I've always been his top concern. I had been home for only around 30 minutes. The bathtub was ready and the ice was chilling my martini when I heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was the Chinese food I had ordered, I answered the door. The next thing I knew, my memory was hazy. Trying to sit up, my head throbbed intensely. I felt something crusty on my face, and when I scratched, I discovered blood under my fingernail. In a state of panic, I cautiously touched my entire face. Thankfully, my nose was intact, but my cheekbone was fractured, and I had a black eye. Slowly turning my head, I noticed splatters of dried blood on the floor. Further examining myself, I found a bump on the back of my head and a bruise, probably from hitting the ground. Despite the discomfort, I managed to sit up. Visions and fleeting images flickered through my mind. I could clearly see a stocky woman with long black hair and thick eyebrows, her face obscured by a scarf. That's all I could recall, except for a wooden object or bat swinging towards my eyes. I awoke feeling humiliated, still on the sofa. The clock read 5 a.m. and my head was pounding. Every move felt like a heavy ball slamming against the inside of my skull. As I stumbled into the kitchen, I felt soreness in my groin area. The assailant must have kicked me there. I took 2 painkillers and made my way to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I saw a sorry sight. Whatever they had hit me with, my nose was spared, but my cheek was fractured and I had a black eye. Who are these individuals? The woman from earlier and the one from this afternoon. What is happening? I didn't think I had any adversaries, even though I work in real estate. I contemplated whether to summon multiple ambulances but ultimately decided it was unnecessary. The physician yesterday afternoon instructed me to be vigilant for signs of a delayed concussion for a period of 8 hours. The time that has elapsed since the second instance I was hit is now greater. I considered notifying the police but ultimately opted against it. The visibility of our front door from the hotel property was obstructed, and I had even less information to offer than before. Being mistakenly assaulted by one woman is one thing, but experiencing it twice is quite peculiar. Despite it being late, I made the decision to contact Dave, confident that he would have the right course of action. I wonder what went through Dave's mind when he couldn't reach me last night, as he usually does, and I failed to respond. He would have attempted to reach me on both my mobile and landline before inquiring about my whereabouts. I hope my absence didn't lead him to suspect that I was secretly leaving the house during his absence. I have always exercised extreme caution in my personal affairs. Wouldn't it be paradoxical if I were exposed by an erroneous clue? Upon checking my mobile phone, I noticed there were no missed calls from my husband, which was unusual. I then used my landline to review my most recent activities and discovered the last missed call was from 3 days ago. I was puzzled because it was unusual for Dave not to communicate with me while he was away. Typically, as a safety measure, I would call him on his hotel phone to avoid the alleged risks of excessive cell phone use before secretly meeting my lover at a motel or, on rare occasions, inviting him over. It occurred to me that I had phoned John on my mobile the day before and had yet to erase the record of the call. I was not foolish enough to save his number in my phone, ensuring that without a digital footprint, there would be no proof. My phone contained several images that should never be revealed, but they were securely hidden within the device. I also made sure my phone was not secured with a standard password or a common security measure, but rather with my fingerprint and a robust, lengthy password. Dave believes that my job requires me to keep my password confidential. Whenever he needed to use my phone, I would unlock it for him and made sure it never left my sight. I concluded that it was safer to keep the sensitive photos on my well-protected phone than on any other device that might be found. After deleting the call log to John, I left him a voicemail and noted that he hadn't responded to my earlier call either. It was surprising that Dave hadn't tried to contact me. Despite the early hour, I felt compelled to call him, longing to hear his reassuring voice. The call was immediately directed to voicemail, which was odd, and I speculated that perhaps he had misplaced his charger or his battery had run out, which had happened before. By this time, it was past 5 in the morning, and I had a performance to prepare for. There was no possibility of appearing in my current state, so I applied an unusually heavy amount of makeup to conceal it. After all, I had an extensive collection of makeup at my disposal. I should probably provide some context for this. Throughout high school, I was quite unremarkable. I was one of those who observed from the sidelines while the boys chased after the athletic, popular, and intelligent girls. Although I took pride in not being like some of the other plain girls who, in their quest for popularity, mistakenly believed that exposing themselves equated to success. Consequently, I had no romantic relationships when I left school at the age of 16. My parents, who were not particularly ambitious for me, were content to support me as I pursued various evening classes to obtain some administrative skills while working as a waitress. During my free time, I lost my virginity to someone who, I later realized, was merely a smooth-talking predator. I came to this realization the morning after a brief, inconvenient encounter in his hotel room when he promptly asked me to leave. I dismissed the experience as a learning moment and believed it had made me adept at identifying such predators, but that was not the case. My subsequent romantic encounters ended just as poorly. The one that followed was with a man who had even less experience than I did. I parted ways with him after our initial encounter. My life breezed by in this manner until I reached the age of 20. It was at this juncture that Dave entered my world. Dave was 1 grade above me in school and appeared to be my counterpart in many ways. His height and slim build were notable, Yet there was nothing particularly remarkable about him otherwise. Our conversation began at the restaurant where I was employed, during a lunch he hosted for several patrons. From our initial interaction, I gleaned that he was a man with a definitive career trajectory and the resolve to achieve his goals. I agreed to go on a date with him, and as the saying goes, the rest is history. Roughly 2 weeks after our first encounter, we became romantically involved, and it was evident that we were both inexperienced, which made things somewhat clumsy. However, we were both eager to learn and utilized our relationship for that purpose. Reflecting on my life a year prior to his 21st birthday, I would describe it as positive. I had a boyfriend who was progressing well and who clearly had deep affection for me. We weren't part of the elite social gatherings, but that didn't bother us. We settled into an apartment, and I was enrolled in a real estate course funded by Dave when my significant birthday arrived. Dave commemorated his first substantial bonus by spoiling me. He gifted me a car, a 2-day session with a beauty consultant, and an engagement ring that was larger than I had anticipated. I accepted his proposal, took the car, and postponed using the beauty session. How I wish I could just discard that voucher. Then I might have a husband who is reachable by phone and a face free from marks. Dave reminded me of the voucher, but my focus was on organizing a modest wedding. We didn't have a large circle of friends. Ultimately, I decided to indulge in the beauty session as a personal treat before our wedding. That's when I discovered it was a 2-day appointment with Caroline, a sophisticated woman in her 30s. I couldn't pinpoint her specific talents, but she had a knack for accentuating femininity. Our initial outing was to a hair salon for a significant transformation. I must confess, I was apprehensive about the outcome. The remainder of that day was dedicated to shopping. Caroline escorted me to high-end boutiques, and in the evening, she requested Dave to increase my credit limit using my phone. By day's end, as I gazed at my new look in the mirror, I was tempted to reassure Caroline that her efforts were successful. The next day, the new hairstyle and attire truly enhanced my beauty. The subsequent day at the beauty salon included a range of pampering services: a pedicure, manicure, facial, and scalp massage. Then I encountered Colin, who boasted of being more entertaining than a barrel of monkeys and claimed to have been a stylist for renowned celebrities. Together with Caroline, he spent the next couple of hours transforming my face, including some touch-ups. I was not permitted to see the results until they deemed me flawless. Upon seeing my reflection, I was so taken aback that I stepped backward. It was then that Caroline's exceptional talent became apparent. The attire and hairstyle that previously seemed mismatched now complemented a visage that I had to acknowledge was stunning. The transformation was remarkable. Caroline diverted my gaze from the mirror to listen to Colin's 2-hour discourse on how he revealed the natural work of art that was my appearance. I expressed my gratitude to both him and Caroline for this transformative experience. Had I been aware of the full impact it would have on me, I might have been astounded. Dave did a comical double take upon my return home but quickly composed himself, remarking that I looked as he had always perceived me. That evening was our most passionate yet, and 3 days later, we were wed. The honeymoon was a period of bewilderment for other men, as attractive individuals who had previously ignored me were now eager to dance with me. I entertained their advances as long as Dave was indifferent to it. He was the first to concede that dancing was not his forte. Despite all the newfound attention, I had yet to grasp that the dynamics had shifted. This epiphany dawned on me when our wedding album was delivered. As I perused the photos, I realized how truly breathtaking I looked. For the first time, I became conscious of the fact that I had married a man slightly shorter than myself, a detail that was evident in various photos. Deep down, I suspect I still harbor this sentiment, which is neither rational nor just. What have I accomplished in the 5 years since marrying Dave? He established his company and was on the path to becoming a wealthy man. I leveraged my appearance to make sales in the real estate market. Despite our differing levels of success, I inexplicably felt a sense of superiority. 5 years on, having shown my true colors, I gained popularity, admiration, a sense of entitlement, and within half a year, I became an unfaithful spouse. In my own defense, it was incredibly challenging to resist temptation. Suddenly, my mind, which had rated my own attractiveness as average, was being courted by men who I considered to be almost perfect. It was only after waking up next to a third such individual that I realized they were simply more appealing versions of the predator who had once violated my dignity. From then on, I was fully in charge of selecting my romantic partners. Now, with a marred face, I chose to apply a thick layer of concealer and foundation. Feeling pity for myself, I tried to reach out to Dave every quarter of an hour, yet without any success. It took 90 minutes of applying makeup before I was able to conceal my bruises to my liking. Regrettably, I couldn't get in touch with my husband or make sense of the odd behavior of the two women. To alleviate my sense of isolation, I brewed some coffee and drank it, feeling more solitary than I had in a long time. I always found it difficult to befriend other women, and with Dave not answering, I felt more alone than ever in my time of need. With some time to kill, I messaged John to get in touch when possible, then distracted myself with unimportant emails in my inbox until it was time to head to the office. I carried the laptop bag and the high-end briefcase Dave had gifted me the previous year to my vehicle in the separate garage, placing them in the rear seat. After shutting the door, I turned towards the driver's side and, to my surprise, she was there facing me as I moved away from the rear door of my vehicle. I can only deduce that she must have been concealed behind the garage wall or in another nearby spot when I came back out. The event unfolded so rapidly that it was a blur when it was over. I recall tumbling to the ground and feeling a foot press down on my hands, which I had reflexively lifted to shield my face. The assault ceased eventually, and I made a dash for the house. The savagery of the onslaught was truly horrifying, and my face felt like it was on fire. Briefly opening the door, I staggered to the downstairs washroom. The mirror showed 3 deep gashes on my left cheek and 2 on the right, seemingly from sharp fingernails. My right upper and lower arm were sore, but thankfully, nothing was fractured. I contacted the police once more, then tried calling Dave and John as I awaited the arrival of law enforcement. No one picked up the phone. I felt utterly abandoned. The office rang shortly after 9, inquiring why I had neglected a client. They became slightly less agitated when I recounted the assault that occurred while I was on duty for the real estate firm. The police weren't much assistance, and it appeared the media thought I was squandering their time with my imprecise descriptions. They questioned the neighbors and offered to call an ambulance, which I declined. What I really needed was for my husband to respond to my calls. In a state of bewilderment, I shut the door after the officers left, walked into the living room, and shouted at the photograph on the mantelpiece of Dave and me. "Next time, Dave, you'll bring your phone charger, even if I have to pack it for you." Being attacked by one random woman was rare, 2 was highly improbable, but 3 was nearly inconceivable. It was time for me to seriously ponder why I might have so many adversaries. Sadly, I couldn't come up with any reason. This time, makeup couldn't cover the marks. To make matters worse, I had to wipe off the creams I had applied earlier with makeup remover wipes to clean the fresh wounds with a disinfectant. It was uncertain what kinds of germs the assailant had under her nails. The scratches stung severely, and applying the disinfectant felt as though I was dousing my skin with gasoline. The task was even more arduous because my right arm was beginning to feel raw and bruised. By the conclusion of the ordeal, my face had turned red and patchy, and it seemed the final assailant had been wearing heels or something similar, as my arms and forearms bore bruises with clear shapes. I reached out to Dave once again, longing to hear his comforting voice, yet my call was directed to his voicemail again. Out of frustration, I contemplated composing an email to him, with the hope that he would read it and rush back home. However, the problem was that my laptop was left in the car. As I descended the stairs with the awkwardness of a nonagenarian, the prominent bruises on my lower back, legs, and groin were impossible to overlook. While attempting to unlock the front door, a wave of fear restrained me. Chastising myself for my timidity, I recalled lessons from real estate seminars and gave myself a motivational speech. The reason for the assault was unclear, but it seemed to be a case of mistaken identity after the three women vented their frustration on me. That was my initial thought. Now, thinking more rationally, I considered the possibility of checking the garage from the back door to potentially catch and confront any intruders by surprise. As I moved from room to room, ensuring the windows were secure and assessing the path to the garage, I noticed several blind spots. The isolated nature of the backyard made me feel exposed, with no one around to act as witnesses. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was Dave. I hurried to answer it, disregarding the pain from my injuries. To my dismay, it wasn't Dave on the line. Instead, it was my office scheduling a meeting with a client at a hotel in half an hour. My attempts to explain my injuries were dismissed. They were operating with minimal staff, and they implied they could easily replace me if I couldn't manage. The immediate challenge was to reach my car without harm. An idea struck me. I would call a taxi. That's exactly what I did, providing precise instructions for the taxi to park in the driveway center where I could have a clear view from the house. After all, someone could be lurking behind the garage or the hedges along the property boundary. With the taxi driver present, I felt assured of my safety. While waiting for the taxi, I did what I could to treat my facial injuries. 10 minutes later, the sound of the taxi's horn signaled me to perform a final visual sweep outside before making a hasty and clumsy beeline for the taxi's refuge. It wasn't until we were a block away from my house that I began to unwind. The driver was a woman, which initially concerned me, but she quickly lost interest in me after inquiring about my destination. 15 minutes later, as we approached the hotel, I realized with a sinking feeling that my house keys were inside my briefcase, which was in the backseat of my car in the garage. Turning the taxi around would result in at least a 25-minute delay for the meeting, potentially causing the client to become irate for being inconvenienced a second time and possibly demanding my dismissal from the agency. I resolved to proceed with the meeting as planned, intending to show the client the property's exterior and cite some administrative errors for the missing keys. Although I was likely to lose the sale, I held on to the hope that I wouldn't lose my job. Before arriving home, I tried calling Dave again and waited half an hour for the client, who also arrived by taxi. She was a tall, dark-haired woman in her 30s, quite attractive except for her eyes, which were concealed behind dark sunglasses. Carrying a fashionable oversized bag, she glanced at a piece of paper and then approached me, accepting my explanation for the key mishap but appearing annoyed when I suggested we could only walk around the exterior and look through the windows. Fortunately, I was well versed in the property's details, so I didn't need to refer to the notes I had left in my briefcase. Deep down, I harbored the hope that if the house didn't sell quickly, the owners might reduce the price enough for Dave and me to afford it. The neighborhood was a lovely green area inhabited by young professionals, and Dave and I would blend in seamlessly. In the backyard, I showcased a detached art studio, detailing its amenities, and then moved to the master bedroom window to check the view through a slit in the curtains. Suddenly, I heard an odd noise behind me. On reflection, I would characterize the noise as a clicking sound. As I turned around, I saw the client clutching a telescopic baton, commonly promoted in women's self-defense catalogs. Her once adorable face twisted into a grimace of pure loathing. I'm pretty sure she spat out a curse before she lashed out with the baton at my head with great force. The strike landed on my quickly lifted forearms, causing intense pain, and I distinctly heard the sound of a bone snapping. I have a feeling that in her rage, the woman heard the crack as well. Her fury seemed to diminish as she watched me cry out in agony, my hand dropping as the pain became unbearable. Yet, a trace of her anger lingered, and she hit me on the side of my head. I managed to take most of the impact with my uninjured hand, but the hit still sent me tumbling to the floor. When I regained consciousness, the frenzied woman had vanished, leaving me in solitude. Although she was gone, I noticed something had dropped from her purse when she took out the baton, a slip of paper that I saw her shove into her bag earlier. Upon closer inspection, I discovered a photograph, roughly A5 in size, face up on the ground. It was a photo I recognized well, one of my personal favorites. I was baffled as to how this unhinged woman had obtained a copy of it. It was a selfie I snapped about 3 months prior, capturing an intimate moment with John. My phone was extended in my hand when I captured the image. Despite the circumstances, I still managed to press the shutter button, and the perfect composition was nothing short of serendipitous. I reminisced about the shabby motel room we paid for in cash, where John and I, craving intimacy after weeks apart, indulged in passionate and intense lovemaking. Despite its intensity, the experience brought me an incredible pleasure I had never known before. This photo was how the woman recognized me, which led me to suspect she might be John's wife, given her evident rage. I had never asked John about his wife, just as we never spoke of Dave. I didn't think it was significant enough to consider. After a while, I managed to sit up, cradling my injured hand. Without hesitation, I decided to call an ambulance, but I chose not to involve the police to keep my affairs private and prevent Dave from finding out, which could lead to dreadful consequences. As I waited for the ambulance, I pondered over how John's baton-wielding spouse got her hands on that photo. I had never shared that image with anyone else, nor had I uploaded it to any other device, not even to John. Could someone have hacked my phone? At the hospital, I encountered the same triage nurse who was ready to call the authorities. I persuaded her it was merely an accident, and although she was skeptical, she honored my request after I emphatically nodded no to her questions about my husband. They treated my broken arm, gave me potent pain medication, and sent me home in a taxi. The empathetic taxi driver made sure I got inside my house safely, watching as I locked the door from the inside. Contrary to medical advice, I chased the painkillers with a very generous shot of vodka and began fabricating a story for my husband. I left him a series of confused and concerned voicemails that he would find once he charged his phone. My subsequent attempt to call him was unsuccessful, so I decided to send him an email instead. Since my laptop was in the car and it was now dark, I didn't want to risk another encounter outside. Then I remembered our old desktop computer, which we used before getting laptops and which Dave still used occasionally. I powered it on and stepped away to pour another vodka. When I returned, I saw a small spinning hourglass on the monitor with the word "sync" beneath it. What was it syncing? After using the restroom, which was quite a challenge with one hand in a sling, I came back to find the computer had finished syncing. What it had synced with and what was now displayed on the screen was horrifying. Well, that explained everything, absolutely everything. Who were these terrible women and what was their motive? Strangely, having this information gave me a sense of relief. After the utter disarray of the last day, the image on our old home computer's screensaver revealed a lot. It suddenly made sense why my husband hadn't called me during his business trip for the first time in ages. Why he hadn't picked up my calls, why he might never reach out to me again, and why I was seen as conceited and likely ruined my future. I just managed to get to the bathroom before I violently threw up. As I touched the sore left side of my face, I could feel the deep bruise and the scrapes on the other side before I went back to shut down the computer screen that was showing vile, destructive images on a screensaver of a computer I rarely used. It showed what was on my phone, specifically the photos. These images would change on the screen about every 10 seconds. Oddly, pictures of houses or certain parts of interiors were mixed with far more explicit images. I remembered how a few weeks earlier, my boss had a tech firm update our phones. I kept a close eye on the technician as he fiddled with mine. Now it was clear that one of the updates had caused the photos I had hidden on my phone to sync to my desktop along with my other pictures. And if they could access my old computer's desktop, what about Dave's? No, Dave's laptop was far more advanced than the old family computer. Panic washed over me as I pictured Dave looking at the 100 or so private trophy photos. Photos that were meant for my eyes only. Photos of myself with various men in different settings. Could I envision Dave identifying the faces of my lovers in the photos, printing them out, taking them to my workplace, and matching faces to names in the files with our secretary's help, who was always fond of him? Sadly, I could. Names led to addresses and to their wives. Wives who then saw those photos. Wives who, in my situation, were responsible for the hits, scratches, and bruises. After another call to my husband went unanswered, I forced myself upstairs to check his closet. But what I found only deepened my despair. Then, trying to ignore the horrific images on the old computer's screensaver, I turned the monitor back on, logged into our bank's website, and was greeted by alarmingly low numbers where there should have been substantial ones. I hung my head in defeat. The realization of how selfish, manipulative, and entitled I had been hit me. The impact was as hurtful as all my physical wounds put together. Dealing with both commercial and residential clients, I never ran out of mail options, and I made my choices. Maybe in the beginning, I was extremely cautious with my affairs. I had a firm rule back then: no photos, no videos, no evidence. I did slip up a few times. I was nearly caught by one man who wanted to keep the relationship going after it had ended. That's when I decided to only get involved with married men who had as much to lose as I did. But I became complacent and eased up on my rules when it seemed clear that Dave trusted me completely. That was a grave error, a colossal blunder. I should have maintained my no photos policy. I berated myself for my sheer arrogance, wondering how I could have let this happen. I turned into the popular girl I had always wanted to be in school, and felt the need to validate that popularity by being with all the attractive men. My error was in thinking my marriage could survive if the truth of its nature came out. I wasn't so naive to think Dave would never find out about my infidelities, but I had a contingency plan for when he did. One that I was sure Dave would agree to. I assumed he wouldn't easily find someone to match me and that he would ultimately forgive me. My strategy relied on him finding out about just one affair. I would acknowledge my faults, acknowledge his expertise in seduction, cry a little, vow it would be the last time, and then plead with him to allow me to disclose all my secrets. As I pondered, I questioned whether this was just a strategy to protect myself, to delay facing the truth that Dave might never forgive me. He didn't find me physically with another person, which would have set off my planned reaction. How was I to foresee that he would find out about my online affairs with numerous partners simultaneously?